Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar on connecting communities with natural capital. I'm Kat McElwraith from the CABA Technical Support Team. Presenting this webinar is Ellie Brown. Ellie is the GIS Data and Evidence Officer from Ribble Rivers Trust and will taking us through some of her work on developing a health and wellbeing evidence base and how it's being used to connect communities with natural capital. I think this is a really brilliant piece of work, and I hope that you find it as useful as I have. The webinar is funded by Natural Course with support from CABA, and it's been part of the last 3 days of the Catchment Data and Evidence Forum. If you've got any questions for Ellie during the webinar, please post them in the Q&A function. We'll do our best to try and answer some of them while Ellie's speaking. However, there will also be a dedicated question section at the end of the presentation. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can today, but for those questions that we don't manage to get to, we will put those into a summary, which will be collated after the event. Also, just to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and we'll share the output via the CABA website soon. So right, over to Ellie, if you're ready.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So hi everyone, thank you for joining this webinar. My name's Ellie Brown and I'm the GIS Data and Evidence Officer for Ribble Rivers Trust, which is a Ribble conservation charity based up in Yorkshire and Lancashire. So my role at Ribble Rivers Trust is to use location-based data to evidence the need for particular types of catchment management and to prioritise the locations where those works are likely to have the greatest, often multiple benefits for the environment, for wildlife and for people, to make sure that we make best use of the limited resources that we have available to us. And that's because, like a lot of organisations on this call, we operate over a really large area that's facing multiple problems. So the Ribble catchment is over 1,400 kilometres squared, and there's more than 4,300 kilometres of rivers. So we need help to identify which issues we should tackle first and where. So this webinar is looking at an evidence base that we've developed around connecting communities with natural capital. And so if anyone's unfamiliar with the term, natural capital is the world's stocks of natural assets, so things like geology, soil, air, water, and all living things. And it's from this natural capital that we humans derive a range of services, which are often called ecosystem services, which make human life possible. So things like the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and recreational opportunities and that kind of thing. So the evidence base that I'm going to present today tries to identify priority areas where the creation or improvement of public open space could have the greatest benefits for people's health and well-being by providing good quality, appealing outdoor spaces for recreation. And this is in addition to those works benefiting the environment. So this analysis was designed to identify areas that currently have the greatest issues in terms of people's health and well-being. And this is particularly obesity, inactivity, and the issues that are associated with them. But the analysis also aimed to identify where the environment is likely to be having a negative impact on people's health and well-being too. And the overall aim was to identify areas where the improvement or the creation of public open spaces could have the greatest positive impact on people's health and well-being by encouraging people to access the green and blue spaces around them, by improving activity levels, and therefore reducing the number of people with diseases that are associated with obesity and inactivity, and also through reducing the impact the environment has on people. So really the idea was that this project could help to reduce the costs to the NHS of treating people with obesity-related issues, in addition to the projects having benefit for wildlife and the environment. And well, really the health of the environment and people are interconnected. They don't have to be treated separately as they often have been in the past. And by addressing both health and environmental issues through a single project, we can make limited funds in both the health and environmental sectors go further and achieve more. So why are we, an environmental charity, attempting to connect communities with their natural capital in the key areas that we identify with this analysis, which you'll see in a bit? Well, just as an example, Physical inactivity creates a huge annual cost for the NHS, which is estimated to be £8.2 billion a year. And this is because inactivity can lead to a range of health issues, with people who are physically inactive spend more days in hospital and visit their GPs more often than average than people who are active. And I just want to highlight a key sentence that's in the middle of its infographic that says, if central Bedfordshire encouraged 10% of its population to exercise through access to good quality green space, it could save an estimated £2.9 million in healthcare costs, which I assume it means annually. And it's very well documented and evidenced how access to blue and green space, so outdoor spaces with water and greenery, has a positive impact on people's health and well-being. So I did a very quick Google search and it came up with all these articles from leading health organisations and academic institutions about this. And we're hearing more and more these days about the potential for GPs to give out green prescriptions as opposed to traditional treatments for illnesses. And as this infographic states, 6 to 8 months after receiving their green prescription, 63% of patients are more active than they were before, and 46% have lost weight. However, to be able to provide green prescriptions, those good quality outdoor blue and green spaces first need to exist. And then, as a bit of an addition to that, our hope is that also, if people can access the outdoors regularly, they're more likely to appreciate it and look after it. So people will get the health and well-being benefits of being outdoors, and additionally, hopefully, the environment gets looked after better. So today we're going to be looking at an analysis, as I said, that identifies where connecting communities with natural capital could have the greatest benefits. And so we're going to be looking at the data sets that were included in the analysis, the methodology and the results, how Ribble Rivers Trust use this evidence base to target and deliver multi-benefit improvements to public open spaces. We'll cover how you can access the data as well, because it's available for the whole of England. And we'll also give a local example of how we've used it to engage with local authorities and public bodies and local communities. And then I'll quickly detail future planned updates to this analysis, and then there will be some time at the end for you to ask questions or provide comments and feedback. So the first stage of the analysis was to identify where health and well-being could benefit the most people through the improvement of, where health and well-being could benefit the most from the improvement of public open spaces. And we used a range of data sets that are kind of available for the whole of the country that have been produced by leading health, sport and government organisations. So in theory, it's the best data available to base this analysis on. So we used quite a lot of data from Public Health England, including their National Child Measurement Programme, lots of Public Health England data that's available on a really wide variety of health issues, such as life expectancy for males and females, the fraction of mortality that's thought to be caused by air pollution, percentage of overweight adults, the number of people that have cancer, coronary heart disease, diabetes, hypertension and stroke, which are all obesity-related diseases, and then a couple of statistics relating to mental health. We also use data from Sport England's Active Lives data, looking at activity levels in children and adults, and we used the government's Index of Multiple Deprivation, and then we also used Office for National Statistics population data. So statistics relating to various health and wellbeing issues were taken from each of those data sets that I've just mentioned. And health and wellbeing issues are generally reported as a percentage of the population, particularly the Public Health England data. So for example, it will report the percentage of adults that are classed as overweight or obese, the percentage of people aged 17 plus who have diabetes and so on. And where this was the case and where it was applicable, we used those percentages combined with the population statistics to estimate the number of people suffering from an illness, the number of people who were inactive and so on. And the reason for this was that The analysis was designed to identify where nature-based interventions could improve health and well-being of the most people, and therefore where it could have the greatest potential to reduce the burden on the NHS and save the NHS the most money. And so this is why measures were adjusted to reflect number of people and not just percentage of a population with an illness or who were inactive and so on. So for example, if you had X amount of money to create an intervention in one ward, but you have 2 wards to choose between, you've got Ward A, which has a population of 100, 50% of which are obese. So that means 50 people within that ward are obese. But you've got Ward B as well, which has a population of 1,000, only 10% of that ward are obese, but that equates to 100 people. If you prioritise where you wanted to invest your money in an intervention, purely on the percentage of a population that has an illness, you go with Ward A because that's, 50% of that ward is obese, but that's only 50 people. But if you prioritise where you wanted to invest that money based on the number of people with an illness, you go for Ward B, because even though only 10% of that population were obese, actually that equates to 100 people, which is more than in Ward A. I will say that we will be updating this analysis over the coming months, which I'm going to detail later, as part of which I will be kind of looking to see whether this is the best method for analysing statistics or whether there would be a better method, such as maybe calculating a prevalence rate. And that's particularly as we're now aware that the analysis results have the potential to be useful for quite a wide variety of reasons, more than we initially thought. So any thoughts that anyone has on this would be really welcome, particularly from those of you who work in the healthcare sector, because I know that there's a few of you on this webinar. So the statistics that we were using for this analysis can be reported at various spatial resolutions. So it might be for each administrative ward or each district or each clinical commissioning group area and so on. And different data sets that were used in the analysis reported their statistics at these different spatial scales, but irrespective of what the spatial scale was. For each of the statistics, the areas were split up into 10 deciles, so that 10% of districts that had the greatest number of adults that were inactive were placed in decile 1, the worst decile, and then the 10% of districts that had the least number of adults that were inactive were placed into decile 10, which is the best decile, and so on. And where there was more than one measure that was really closely related to another, so for example, the number of people with different obesity-related diseases, so the number of people with cancer, the number with coronary heart disease or hypertension, diabetes or stroke, calculated an average decile for each area, so a general obesity-related disease statistic, so that areas that had a high number of people with each of those obesity-related diseases would be in a worse decile, within a worse kind of 10% of places, than an area with relatively few people with each obesity-related disease. So what we're doing is we're really trying to identify where the creation of accessible open spaces for outdoor recreation could increase people's activity levels in the greatest number of inactive people, and it could prevent the greatest number of people developing those obesity or inactivity related illnesses, and it could lessen the impact on those already living with them, as well as reduce pressure on the NHS. So the analysis was carried out for the whole of England, and I will come back to how you can access those results too in a bit, but I'm just going to show you the results for Lancashire at this stage, because that's the area that Ribble Rivers Trust used the results in. So the results show the areas of Lancashire that are of national importance in terms of their indices of multiple deprivation, so that's the dark areas on this map, where they're of national importance in terms of the number of children who are obese, the number of adults that are overweight, where the percentage of deaths that are thought to be caused by air pollution are high in terms of the national average, where there are a high number of inactive adults and children, and also where life expectancy for males and females is lower than the national average in some areas. And it also identified that there are some clinical commissioning group areas in Lancashire that are of national importance in terms of the number of people that have obesity-related illnesses and mental health illnesses as well. It is important to point out that this analysis hasn't looked at the causation of any illnesses. So although we've included stats related to the number of people with obesity-related diseases, those illnesses might not have been caused by obesity in all the individuals that are ill. So that is just something to bear in mind. And then this is a bit of a messy map, but I've taken each of those maps that you've just seen and I've just overlaid them on top of each other. And hopefully you can see that there are some areas across Lancashire and actually the rest of the country where there are high numbers of people currently struggling with various health and wellbeing issues associated with obesity and inactivity. And those areas just aren't doing so well in this respect compared to other areas of the country. And so this is the same information as that previous map, just hopefully displayed a little bit more neatly. And it shows where there are currently the greatest issues in terms of the number of people with obesity-related illnesses, inactivity, and mental health issues. So in other words, the priority areas where we have an opportunity to make the biggest difference to the most amount of people. And so the darker the red on this map, the higher the priority of the area is, because the worse the current situation is. I will point out that because this analysis was carried out using the number of people with an illness, the number who were inactive and so on, rather than say a prevalence rate, places with more people, so towns and cities, are identified as the problem areas. Again, if you think there's a better way to do it, I really welcome your feedback. And this analysis was carried out a year ago, but I will be updating this analysis over the coming months before the end of the year to include the most recent data sets and also some others. So for example, those relating to COVID-19 incidents. And again, I would genuinely welcome your feedback or any thoughts you have on the analysis so far and what could be done to improve it, because we do want this analysis and its results to be as useful as possible for as many people as possible. So as I say, this map, it does identify priority wards where there is the potential to reduce obesity-related illnesses, inactivity and mental health issues in the greatest number of people through the creation of or improvement of accessible blue or green open spaces in these problem areas. And you could tackle these issues in various ways. So you could actually involve the communities that live in those problem areas with helping out with the actual physical works as they're going on. So they could help to plant the trees if you're planting trees in this blue-green open space. And you could do that through either new or established volunteer programs. But then also we've hopefully provided them with an appealing public open space that is close to home, that will hopefully encourage them to get outdoors and use those blue-green spaces regularly. So these national health and wellbeing analyses results are available online for any of you to make use of if you wish. For those of you who do have ArcGIS online, if you know what that is, you can add the data into your own maps. I'll give you a very brief kind of tour of how you do that, but if you need help, just shout. So you log in, you create a new map, you go to add data, you search for layers that are within ArcGIS online. You just search for Ribble Rivers Trust layers and then they will all appear. You just add them into your map and there they are. You can see all the data and then you can interact with that map. The only data that isn't there is the one that relates to the index of multiple deprivation, and that's because the government has uploaded that data set onto ArcGIS online rather than the Rivers Trust. So to find that, you would just search for index of multiple deprivation and then add that data in. If you don't have access to ArcGIS online, and I appreciate that there'll be some of you on this webinar that have never even heard of that, you can access all the data in this series of interactive maps. And I'm going to attempt to give you a live demo. So this is the interactive map, and I will post a link to it in the chat function at the end of this webinar. But it opens on a page that gives you a bit of background about the analysis that was carried out. There's a page that tells you how to use this interactive map. It is fully interactive. So you just click through different tabs to see different data sets. You can open this page, which shows you the kind of the summary of where those problem areas are within England, where there are multiple issues relating to health and well-being. You can zoom into different areas of the map. It shows you where some data sets had data missing. So You might not have as complete a picture in those areas as you might in others. You can search for a particular area that you work in. No, that's not where I work. And it'll take you to it. You can move between the different data sets that kind of fed into the analysis as well. So if you really want to kind of delve into the data, you can do that. And it's all kind of interactive, so you can really kind of see what the statistics are for particular areas, not just see how they compare to other areas. So the maps are always kind of on the right hand side of the page, but then on the left hand side of each page there's also an information box that gives you kind of background to that stage of the analysis. Kind of gives you a reference to the source of the data. There's links in all of them, I think, which you can click to open more data, which might be the link where the data came from, or an explanation of what something means, and so on. So if anyone does have any thoughts about how we might be able to improve how we display this data to a wide audience, again, I'd welcome your feedback on that. And as I say, I will pop a copy of this web address in the chat function at the end. So how can you use this data? If you operate over a large area, these maps might help you to prioritise where your actions could have the greatest positive impacts. If you work across a small area or in areas that the analysis hasn't picked out as a national priority, you can explore this underlying data here to see the stats for each area, and it's likely that there will still be large numbers of people with the diseases or who are inactive and so on, maybe just not as large as in other areas. But having access to those numbers could help you to build a case to get funding or so on. So in that case, these maps that kind of delve into the individual data sets might be of more use to you. And looking through these individual data sets might even help you to determine a particular course of action, because you might discover that, for example, children in your area of interest are pretty active, but adults are not. So that could help you to design an intervention that to target those that need it the most. I will ask that if you do use this evidence base to plan or support funding bids or projects, can you please let me know, just so that I can keep track of whether it's actually useful or not. My email address will be on the last slide of this presentation, but also if it loads in time, there is a little tab that says feedback, and my email address is on there as well. And as I've previously mentioned, I will be updating this health and wellbeing analysis for the whole of England over the coming months. And then the results of that analysis are also going to be made available in the same kind of way. Let's try and go back to my presentation. So the analysis that I've just shown you was carried out a year ago, but since we did it, it has become clear that the analysis and its results could be used for so much more than we initially thought by so many different organisations in both the environmental and the health sectors. So as a very recent example, the link between obesity and COVID-19 has emerged. Again, a very quick Google search came up with loads of papers on this. And it's kind of contributed to the government's Better Health campaign, which you might have seen adverts on TV for recently. So the updates I'm going to be making to this analysis will be, or I'm going to attempt to incorporate data relating to COVID-19 incidents as well, hopefully. So that's kind of the first stage of the analysis. The second stage of the analysis looks at where the environment has the potential to be negatively impacting on people's health and well-being. So again, the data has been sourced from various leading organisations. So the National Atmospheric Emissions Inventory, Ordnance Survey, the Environment Agency, Natural England, local councils, and so on. It is important to say that this study doesn't suggest any causation between the environment and public health and well-being. We've not carried out in-depth statistical analyses and research studies to look for any causal links. And I think there are some PhD students and medical professionals on this webinar who are carrying out amazing work in those fields. But this was an exercise to identify if there are locations where a high number of people could potentially benefit from the creation or improvement of public blue and green spaces by reducing the impact that the environment has on their health and well-being, in addition to it potentially reducing the prevalence of obesity and inactivity related illnesses. This stage of the analysis was only carried out for Lancashire, but I will be updating and extending it to cover the whole of England again before the end of the year. And those results will be made available online, like the health and wellbeing analysis that I've just shown you. So through this analysis, we've identified priority locations where the environment has the potential to negatively impact on people's health and wellbeing. So we've identified wards that don't have the minimum of 4 hectares of public open space per 1,000 population that is recommended. And so they don't have access to that blue and green space that is so good for their health and wellbeing. So these are kind of the reddy orangey areas on that map. We've identified communities where there are large numbers of properties that are at risk of flooding. So that's the orange areas on this map. But also the areas of land that drain into those at-risk areas, which is the kind of grey hatched areas. And so therefore where reducing, so where the flood risk that land is contributing to could be putting a strain on people's mental health, which can sometimes kind of manifest in physical problems, and where it could be affecting people's well-being. And we've also identified where air pollution is the highest currently, which, as you know, can have serious implications for people's respiratory health. And again, if you just overlay those different maps on top of each other, you can see there's some areas that are kind of struggling with all these problems. Again, this is just the same information, hopefully presented in a slightly more understandable way. So these blue areas on the map are areas that are facing multiple problems where the environment could be impacting on people's health and well-being for multiple reasons. And so it's in these blue and maybe green areas where the creation of new publicly accessible blue-green open space, public open spaces could provide that much needed outdoor space that people don't currently have. You could create natural flood management features on those areas that reduce flood risk, and so reduce the kind of the mental strains that can cause for people. And planting trees in those areas could reduce particulate air pollution through deposition of particles on the trees, and also trees can help to disperse those particles as well. So we have 2 sets of evidence, one that highlights areas that currently have the greatest health and wellbeing issues within their populations, and one that highlights where the environment has the potential to be having the greatest negative impact on people's health and wellbeing. And so by overlaying those maps, we can see that we could have the greatest positive impact on health and wellbeing if we were to provide high quality, accessible blue-green space in those areas. And so those kind of really priority areas are those where kind of the red areas and the blue areas overlap. And so those of you that operate in Lancashire, both the health and wellbeing and that environmental analysis results can be accessed by Ribble Rivers Trust mapping portal, which you can see on screen now. And again, I'll put a link to it in the chat function at the end. But please be aware that there is a slightly different version of the health and wellbeing data shown on this map as opposed to the national one. Not vastly different, but just slightly. So that is the evidence base, and I'm going to quickly cover how we use that evidence base to engage with key stakeholders. So that's landowners, public authorities, public bodies and local communities. So our primary objective is to engage with the public and local authorities to develop projects on their land, and that's really because it's an easier win. But we do need to find the resource to enable someone to go out and visit the sites and have discussions with local authorities and so on. And the way that we do this is, well, we have this evidence base that helps us identify kind of broad areas where this project could be of benefit. And then we identify potential sites within those bigger areas. And we do that with the public and local authorities. And then we've created a survey that we use to identify the potential benefits that a project could have on that site and what it could achieve for both health, wellbeing and the environment. So for example, we can identify whether access could be increased, whether the site could be made more appealing, whether improvements could be made to make it more suitable for different types of users in terms of users with different interests or different levels of mobility. And we cost up each of those options that could be carried out on the site, and then we produce a report. And we discuss those actions with the local authority and the target audience in the local community, and collectively decide which to take forwards. And of course, we've got to source funding to enable us to do all of this and actually carry out the project. As an example, we've been working with a local authority recently who I think have agreed to put 40,000 in, and we need to find match funding to kind of top that up. So we've been talking with the local health board and other potential funders. So we use the analyses that I've shown you so far to identify priority sites where people could benefit from the improvement to the provision of good quality, accessible green and blue space. But within those areas, we then use a combination of other GIS or map-based data sets and analyses, some of which are listed here in green, to identify where the wildlife and the environment could also benefit. So where multiple benefits could be achieved by carrying out a project in that priority area. I'll quickly switch to a different presentation. Hopefully that's updated. So this is a presentation that we put together that puts forward a case for developing a project at Peel Park in Accrington, which is in Lancashire. And it's based on the series of data sets that you've just seen, as well as some of the others that I just mentioned then. So Peel Park is the area on that map that's highlighted in yellow. And we are able to show how the central Hyndburn district, which Peel Park is in, was identified as a Lancashire-wide priority, and actually a national priority, for both having the greatest issues relating to obesity, health, well-being, inactivity and deprivation, and also where there's quite a high potential for the environment to be negatively impacting people's health and well-being. And so it's a location where investment has the greatest potential to have multiple benefits for people. We were able to evidence that there are two wards that Peel Park kind of falls within, that it's adjacent to, that are both high priorities in terms of the need to address current health and wellbeing issues, or they're of kind of medium to high priority. We were able to provide statistics for each ward that kind of put the area in context with the rest of the country. So we're able to show how there are some wards within the area where there's the index of multiple deprivation is really high, and so it's of national importance, or where there's a really high number of children that are obese in terms of the national average. We're able to show how there's a lot of adults that are overweight or obese, how life expectancy is quite low, really quite low in terms of the national average, how there's quite a high percentage of deaths in adults aged 30 plus that are thought to be caused by air pollution. We were able to evidence how inactivity levels in children and adults is quite high, and we can also evidence from these public health, it would be Sport England data sets, that what the inactivity is in school children in different settings, so both in and outside of school. And actually in the Hyndburn district, more than 50% of children are inactive outdoors, outside of school. So by providing opportunities to be active outside of school, particularly outdoors, would be of great importance. And we can also evidence how the number of people with different obesity related and mental health illnesses are, and how those numbers have changed in recent years and how that compares to other areas of the country. So you can see that actually the numbers are increasing for a lot of those illnesses. We can also evidence that it would be feasible to carry out a project on this particular site, so we can evidence how accessible that site is. So if it's highly accessible, it'll in theory be easier for people to make use of it. So we can evidence what the network of public rights of way and step-free paths are like in the area, and where there might be opportunities to create a network of short, medium and longer distance walk routes that are suitable for different levels of fitness and mobility. We can evidence whether it's feasible to walk or travel through the area with minimal need to go up or down slopes of more than X number of degrees, and therefore whether it's accessible for wheelchair users or pushchairs or those with limited mobility or fitness. We can evidence the number of bus and train stops that are within a specified distance, and so whether the area would be accessible by public transport to people that live outside of the area immediately surrounding the park. And we can also evidence crime rates and break that down into the types of crime that have happened in the area in recent years. So we can kind of help us to decide whether antisocial behaviour is likely to prevent people from using the space, even if we did improve it. We can also evidence how much blue and green space people can access in the proposed project area, which we know is fantastic for health and wellbeing. We can evidence whether there is a real need to improve the amount of public open space within the local area based on how much there currently is. And we can evidence current air pollution levels in the area and what the numbers of what number of deaths are thought to be caused by particulate air pollution. And so we can kind of demonstrate that if we were to create woodlands in publicly accessible open spaces, we could reduce people's exposure to this particulate air pollution, because I think I mentioned earlier that those particles deposit on the trees and the trees disperse them, so they're not as concentrated. And so this could reduce the risks of people developing certain respiratory diseases if there's this open space within a polluted area that is less polluted. We can also evidence if there's an area upstream communities that are at risk of flooding, and therefore whether the creation of natural flood management features such as woodlands or wetlands or leaky dams and so on could be of benefit to the communities below. And we can also evidence specific overland flow paths, which are the red and orange lines on this map, that where natural flood management features could be placed to intercept those flow paths, and so that could reduce the amount of water and sediment that's entering rivers, both of which can affect flood risk. And we can also evidence where invasive non-native species such as Himalayan balsam currently are. And so firstly, these issues could be tackled through volunteer days with the local community, and that involves being fairly active and so could have health and wellbeing benefits. But also by removing Himalayan balsam from riverbanks, you reduce flood risk, as it reduces the risk of riverbanks eroding and large quantities of sediment entering the river, which reduces the capacity of the river to hold water. So I touched briefly on some environmental improvements that will benefit people but also wildlife, but there are a range of other data sets that could be used to evidence where the creation of woodland is likely to have multiple benefits for the rivers and wildlife. So we can evidence where we should plant trees to reduce sun exposure or diffuse pollution or flood risk, and where those rivers could also help to connect up existing woodland habitat. And there's also like a multitude of other environmental benefits that we could evidence. So that's just a real world example of how we've used this data and evidence to put a case forward to improve an existing park. But this also works when designing new public open spaces as well. So as I said, the primary objective of using this data set is to engage with local authorities and the communities, but the secondary objective is to approach private landowners, so farmers, to see if, if we're able to secure funding to do so. And this is a secondary objective because it's likely to be more challenging, as they're generally not as keen on the thought of increasing public access to their land. But we envisage this evidence base working in a similar way to how SciMap works for farm advice. For those of you who are familiar with SciMap, so you can use SciMap flow paths to engage with farmers to implement measures that prevent water and soil entering watercourses. So we'd love to be able to use this evidence base to identify opportunities with farmers for alternative sources of income, where if they diversify a bit and increase recreational opportunities on their land, they could have a different source of income. And we're also trying to link this evidence base in with development. as in like development of sites. So for example, developers often have to incorporate measures to reduce flood risk within a development. And there's been an example recently where our maps actually showed that the land that's upstream of a site that's been developed was contributing to the flood risk of other properties nearby, not just the development. And so if the flood risk intervention was moved upstream, instead of being on the actual development site, it would have greater flood risk reduction impact, but would also free up a bit of space for a couple more houses in the development. And there are also some developments that have to carry out environmental improvement projects. And where these developments are in urban areas, we could use this data to highlight where the creation of a nice publicly accessible open space by the developers on that site could have a positive impact on local people's health and well-being. So in using this evidence base, there are a few considerations that you need to think of. So your approach needs to be holistic, but even though you're taking a holistic catchment approach or just a holistic area approach, it has to be site specific. So for example, if a project site is next to the M6, we'd want to plant lots of trees to reduce air pollution, but you wouldn't necessarily want to encourage people to use that space for recreation. Whereas if you're planning a project in, say, Pleck Meadows in Accrington, we might not want to cover it with trees, but instead plant just a few trees to have that air quality and natural flood management benefits. But then we'd also want to improve access for people as well. So ideally, you want to create a mosaic of habitats that inspire people to get outdoors, but that also improve the environment. You want to have those multiple benefits from one project. So any projects also need to be sustainable. So any site that you create or improve in terms of that they need to be maintained into the future, but not to a great cost of the trust or whoever it was that developed that site. And a good way of doing this is that once a project site has been identified, to hold community events very early on before any of the work begins, firstly to make sure that people will use the site, but also to involve them in the design process. So people are more likely to feel a sense of pride in the site and want to look after it and are less likely to vandalise it and so on, if they've kind of been involved in that process. And you can also recruit volunteers to help to develop that site, kind of the physical volunteer work, and then also maintain it. So as an example, these pictures are both from a site called Primrose Lodge, which is in the middle of Clitheroe in Lancashire. It's an old mill lodge, and as you can see on the right, it was pretty run down. It was just full of silt. There was no water in it anymore. And Ribble Rivers Trust are developing it as a nature reserve, and it's not even open yet. The work hasn't even finished, but 50 volunteers have already signed up to help maintain it. They've specified whether they want to help control Himalayan balsam or carry out litter picks or manage the social media pages and so on. So people really like this site, even though they can't step foot in it, just because it's in their local area, and they really want it to be a space that they can go and use, and they want to look after it. In terms of challenges of developing and using the evidence base that I've just shown you, evidence the link between the environment and people's health and well-being is quite tricky. So as I mentioned, this analysis isn't identifying causal relationships between the environment and health and well-being. I know that there's some other organisations, I think Mersey Forest, who have done a bit of work on this, and as far as I'm aware, it is quite hard to pull together a large data set that evidences the link between the environment and people's health and well-being. There also isn't a step-by-step process that other organisations can follow to replicate how we've used this database to engage with local authorities and the public health bodies and so on. We're very fortunate in Lancashire that we have a really open-minded Director of Public Health who recognises the importance of public open space for health. We work very closely with the Environment Agency, who've really helped us to develop that relationship with Lancashire's Director of Public Health. So connections are really important, because you might not get listened to, but a project partner might. And having this evidence base and being able to show that what our grassroots connections are has been really important in proving that we know what we're on about and that we get stuff done. And also having an evidence base that shows where different sectors, so the health and the environment sector, have overlapping objectives, makes making those connections so much easier. We just need more resources to do that. And finally, the biggie, both the health and the environment sectors are really short of funds. So at Ribble Rivers Trust, we have to pull in funds from multiple sources for the majority of projects that we do these days, and it'll be the same for a lot of organisations. So collaboration is key. The health and the environment sectors would benefit from working together if we pool our collective knowledge, if we pool our collective resources and funding to create projects that get more bang for our buck, that have health and environmental improvements. You might need to think outside the box a bit more. So woodlands that are created in these public open spaces could be registered under the Woodland Carbon Code or the Woodland Carbon Guarantee, and that might help encourage councils to get on board, because they could gain an income from the Carbon Code or the Carbon Guarantee, and they could invest that income in maintaining the woodland, or they could put that money into some other works. And if you're considering applying for the Green Recovery Fund, this evidence base could present ideas where jobs could be created to improve public open space. I'm aware of time, so I'll stop waffling now. But if anyone would be interested in having a more in-depth chat off this webinar, I'd be more than happy to arrange another Zoom or other meeting or a phone call. Just get in touch with the details on screen. Thank you very much. And I think we have time for a few questions.
That was brilliant, Ellie. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've got quite a lot of questions. I think people really appreciate what you've done here. Yeah, the first one we've got is from Rebecca Robinson. So she says, you've mentioned identifying the areas of natural environment with negative impacts on people's health and well-being. How did you measure the quality of a green space?
We haven't. It's based purely on the quantity. Measuring quality would be an aspiration. It's just this is kind of entirely a desk-based study using open source data, and that kind of information just isn't available. It's the kind of thing that where you would, if you'd identified an area within a certain district that was a priority, you'd then approach the council, the people that know that area really well, and they could probably say off the top of their heads, oh, that area is actually pretty good, that one could do with improving, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you get some local knowledge in there for the quality. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, we've got one from Alice Fallon. She says it's really exciting. She'd be interested to know how, who designed and funded the analysis? How did you decide on the question and identify the potential of this piece of work? And was there a rough budget for the project?
There was a rough budget. I can't remember what it was. So I designed the analysis, and it kind of came about because really because there's a lack of funding to do any environmental work, and it was in the environmental sector, especially kind of within the CABA, catchment-based approach group, just the importance of collaboration is so kind of obvious, and really people are really kind of behind it. So we were just trying to think of what all the different funding streams were where we could get some of this work done that is going to be of benefit for wildlife and the environment and people. And my boss Jack had the idea that actually maybe now would be a good time to try and see how we could link the health sector up with the environmental sector, because it is becoming more and more apparent how, and people are becoming more and more aware of how being outdoors in nature is so good for you. And yeah, so it was my boss's idea for the funding, my idea for the analysis. And in terms of how much it cost, I will get back to you on that.
Great stuff. Next question is from Gina Rowe, or Rao. Sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Given the opportunities for exercise is one part of the issue, encouraging or motivating people to use these is another key aspect. So is there any community engagement to involve people? Also, are you undertaking any assessment with individuals about their health and well-being? And have you undertaken any assessment sort of before and after any interventions? with local people?
Yeah, so the idea is that we haven't actually physically done a project in any areas yet. We're still kind of in the development stage, and we think we've identified a site in the Peel Park site that we showed you. The idea is that we'll then go to the local communities in the areas that the evidence base suggests have the greatest issues with all the health and wellbeing issues, and then engage with them, firstly to see if they'll use the site, because if they're not going to, there's not much point doing the work. But then also just trying to drum up some interest and get some to sign up to actually help out with the physical works that'll improve the site. The idea is that if a project site does go ahead, there will be kind of a monitoring process put in place where to determine the impact that it has on people's health and well-being. So there would be kind of these measurements carried out in terms of, I can't remember exactly what was planned. There was someone else working on that side of things, but there would be a way, a method that's involved to assess what impact it has on the local community's health and well-being. Again, if you want to know more, I can share those plans with you, but I'd have to go check what they are first.
Great stuff. Next one is from Caroline George. So she's saying it's a brilliant piece of work, and there's lots of potential for other folk to use it. She's interested in whether you used a natural capital accounting approach to value the benefits that would be accrued by some of the investments, or is the phrase natural capital just used as shorthand for natural assets in this case?
I guess the latter, really. I guess the next step would be a kind of to add to the evidence base would be to do the natural capital accounting, but that's not something that's been incorporated yet. But there are a lot of tools out there that enable you to do that. So it would be a very sensible next step, I would say. But it's been opportunity mapping, I would say, rather than kind of putting figures on in kind of terms of like the benefits to rather than monetizing the natural capital. My colleague who actually kind of put the business case together for this, so I just did kind of the evidence base, someone else did the business case, and they kind of monetized the benefits it could have to the NHS and so on, which again, I could find the actual figures before you if you were interested.
Okay, so it's a possible next step.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, from Alan Orchard, have you looked at the correlation between areas of high air pollution and lack of public green space, so less than 4 hectares?
I've not, Alan. I will look into that. I'll make a note. But that would be a very, very sensible thing to do. All suggestions are welcome, so thank you. I'll do that. I'll let you know, Alan. I'll look into it.
Adding things to your list, Ellie,
yeah.
one by one. Yeah, we've got time for a few more questions. It's great. There's so much interest in there. So the next one is from Caitlin Hinson. Again, saying she really enjoyed it. She's interested in what your engagement methods were. So did you use surveys or study groups? And if you've gone down that route, how successful have you been?
I don't know how to answer that. I'm just the data nerd that's done the data thing, so I'm not entirely sure what's happened there. In terms of the Primrose Lodge example, the one that we've done in Clitheroe, it was, I know some volunteer days were held. I know that there was someone who went around and did a letter drop to tell people what was going on, and that drummed up a lot of interest. There's been lots of social media stuff as well. In terms of going forwards, I think the plan is to physically go on, knock on people's doors, and kind of set up public meetings when we're able to do that kind of thing. So I can't really say how it's gone so far because we've not done that side of things yet, but that is the plan going forwards. We really want to try and reach those people that kind of the target audience that are probably the people that are hard to reach. So I can definitely, when we've attempted it, I can let you know how it's gone. But again, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Next year's forum, Ellie.
Yeah.
Okay, one from Tracy Smith. She's asking if there's any opportunities to link fragmented woodland habitats.
Yeah, so we're really lucky in Lancashire that the Lancashire Environment Record Network created a woodland ecological network map that highlights where key areas of woodland are, and then also where key kind of corridors throughout the landscape are. So where if you were to create new woodlands, you could link up these existing woodland habitats. And I don't know if that exists for the rest of the country or in various forms, I'm not sure, but certainly in Lancashire we use that evidence to kind of further justify why the creation of a woodland would be a good thing and why it would achieve multiple benefits for people and wildlife. But I think it is kind of county specific maybe as to what people have produced in those areas.
I think we've got time for one last question. We'll sneak it in before 4 o'clock. So from Donna Dean, she's saying, I work with Natural England and took part last year in some research being run by DEFRA, which looked at citizen engagement on the environment. So the group ran 2 days on a festival in Liverpool, and she's just saying that the research hasn't been published yet, but it might be of interest to you. So maybe she can get in touch with you directly about that.
Yeah, definitely. Because it is quite tricky knowing how to engage people with the environment who aren't already engaged with it, and who at the moment don't have an interest. So yeah, that would be really useful actually. Thank you.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much, Ellie. That was brilliant. There's obviously lots of interest, and yeah, if anybody can have a look at the story map that we posted the link to in the chat, then you can have a look at the data set in a bit more detail. I've posted it already.
Oh, you've posted it. Okay, thank you. I forgot about that. We could also email it around, could we, to people who register?
Yeah, so we'll be sending out a sort of summary and the recording of the webinar, so we can put that information in when it goes out.
Right, okay, brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much, and yeah, thank you everybody for joining the webinar, and I hope that you enjoyed the rest of the forum if you went to any of the other things.